Hello and welcome to another Motors.co.uk new car review. Now the car that we're looking at today is the electric Citroën EC4, but before we dive in and find out what it's like, please remember to give this video a like, leave us a comment underneath to tell us what you think about this car, and don't forget to subscribe to the Motors.co.uk YouTube channel, hitting that bell icon so you get notified each and every time we upload a new video. It's fair to say that the electric car segment is expanding with each passing day. And now that the government has announced that the ban on petrol and diesel cars is moving forward to 2030, it's fair to say that electric cars are going to be an even more common sight on our roads than they are already. And Citroën is a manufacturer which is fully aware of this, which is why it's strapping a battery powertrain to its most famous nameplate, the C4. It's an electric car which is to be designed for families to use every single day, but can it do this? Citroën has followed a careful line with the styling of the EC4. It's jazzy enough to stand out from the crowd, but it's not been designed to look overtly outlandish. It's far higher riding than the previous generation car, which definitely gives it a bit more presence on the road. There are plenty of cuts and lines moving throughout the car's exterior design though, and it's got more than a bit of a concept car look about it. The interior of the EC4 is a bit like the exterior in that it's a great combination of looking a little bit futuristic but also getting the basics done well. For instance, we've got a dual screen setup which gives it a nice clean look, but also we've got plenty of storage options. There's a nice cubby down here, there's one under here, there's another one under here, and there's a phone charging point here for wireless charging if you want to use it. There are also buttons here for the heating and ventilation, buttons on the steering wheel. It's a really well kitted out area to sit. There's also this clever feature which sees a drawer put in on the passenger side into which you find an iPad, and then you take that iPad and you can use it to attach to this holder here, which means that you've got an iPad viewing screen for whoever's sat in the passenger seat. Overall, it's a really well thought out cabin which, although it does feature some harsher plastics, feels up to the grade that we'd expect of a car at this price and in this segment. The sleek roofline that you'll see on the EC4 does come at a bit of a compromise when it comes to interior space. Now I'm 5'11" and I'm sat with my chair in my driving position and my head is, well, yeah, it's touching the roof. So it is a little bit tight. That said, I've got quite a lot of leg room and quite a lot of room for my feet too. There's a small bulge in the middle, which means that those sitting in the middle of the car are going to have to pick their feet up slightly more. It's not too bad, it'll probably be all right for families, but if you are thinking of driving around with adults in the back quite often, then you might want to test it out beforehand just to make sure it fits. But for me, well, it's a little bit snug. When it comes to boot space, the EC4 offers up 380 litres, and whereas you find in other EVs, a lot of that space is taken up by the charging cables, with this Citroën, you actually get a dual boot floor arrangement, which means you can put the cables underneath and you're free to use the whole load area for shopping or bags or whatever you want to use them for. It's a really clever design, and it means that the boot area is far more practical than you find in other EVs. Of course, the EC4 doesn't feature an engine as such, but rather an electric motor and batteries. It utilises a 50 kilowatt-hour battery, which should help it to return up to 217 miles from a single charge, which to be fair is more than enough for most people. Plug in at home and a full charge will take 7.5 hours. However, if you can get access to a rapid 100 kilowatt charger, then a 0 to 80% charge will take just 30 minutes. In addition, if you order an EC4 today, then Citroën will supply a home wall box charger free of charge, which usually costs around £500. Through this, you'll be able to deliver a 7 kilowatt charge, which, as I mentioned, will be able to do a full charge in around 7.5 hours. Now, there's a good chance you're probably wondering, well, that car in the footage is in France, but it looks like we're in the UK, and that's because we are in the UK. We're driving around Coventry today, and the reason for that is that this electric C4 was due to be launched in France at this point, but given current restrictions, travelling all the way to France to drive a car doesn't seem like the most positive of steps to take. So rather than doing that, Citroën brought a set of EC4s across the UK so that we could find out what they're like, and that's the reason why I'm also sat on the left hand side of the car. But that doesn't stop me from understanding what this car is like to drive. So what have we got? We've got a 50 kilowatt hour battery which is linked to a motor which produces just over 130 brake horsepower. Now in power terms that means you're getting 0 to 60 in over 9 seconds, which for pootling around town is more than enough and pretty much on par with what you'd expect from the segment. It's also pretty much what you'd expect from a C4 regardless of which powertrain it was fitted with. Now around town you do feel a certain lumpiness given to the ride, and that's as a result of those batteries being fitted, which puts extra weight on the car's chassis. However, largely though, the car feels like it's been designed with city and urban environments in mind. The steering is nice and light. The ride, though a little bit unsettled over potholes and speed bumps, is largely okay. And the driving position is excellent too. You've got a nice view of the road ahead and the pillars aren't too thick, so you're not going to worry too much about when you're pulling away from junctions and roundabouts. The way that Citroën is pitching its new cars is that rather than having dedicated models for EVs and then dedicated models for petrol and diesel, what it's doing is giving buyers the opportunity to select a car and then pick the powertrain afterwards. That's why this new C4, as well as being available with an electric powertrain, is also available with a petrol and a diesel engine. So realistically, this car drives like the other two. That's because it's designed on the same platform with the same people in mind. It just means that with this car, you plug it in at the end. And realistically, I think that's the way EVs are going to go. It's a way of integrating electric cars into people's lives without taking drastic measures to separate them in some way. Now, as we mentioned, the estimated full range is around 217 miles. Now, as with MPG figures on cars, we'd always advise taking those ranges with a pinch of salt. So with this EC4, you're looking at 217 miles claimed, which realistically we can put around 200 miles during usual driving. You might see a slightly greater dip if you're driving it during the winter when the temperatures are lower and batteries struggle to perform as well. Now, the interesting thing with this electric car is that you're not sensing a huge amount of regeneration when you lift off. In some cars, you lift off the accelerator pedal, don't apply the brakes, and it almost feels like the car has hit the brakes for you. There's a real sense of slowing down. But in this car, you lift off and it's more gradual. It's more like a normal car. And that's going to be far better for people who haven't experienced an EV before, but want to try one out. Of course, one of the added benefits of an EV powertrain is that real zip off the line, because there's no delay in acceleration and that torque delivery. So while the EC4 isn't as razor edged as, say, a Tesla or an Audi e-tron, it's going to feel quite quick enough for most people who are making the transition from a petrol or diesel car into an electric one. But of course, one of the key parts of this car is the price. And what are we talking? Well, for this car in the UK as standard, you're looking at just over £29,000, and that's inclusive of the government's plug-in car grant. That seems like pretty good value given that you've got a more than 200 mile range and you've got a car which is large enough for family use. Of course, by going up the packs as well, you can add more equipment and in turn add more cost, but given that just over 29 grand starting price, this EC4 certainly does seem like quite a tempting thing indeed. But given that just over £29,000 starting price, this EC4 does look pretty tempting indeed. You've got to remember that as well as that starting price, you're also getting an EV home charger fitted for free. And that really makes the whole package quite appealing, because that's one of the biggest costs that you have to incur when setting up as an EV owner in the first place. Though there are many grants to take advantage of, it is quite a significant cost and one that puts many people off from making the switch to an electric car. However, having the ability to go home and charge the car at a higher rate than you would do just off a 3 plug is really beneficial to the whole experience. This EC4 is also very quiet. The refinement is very pleasant indeed. It makes the whole experience far more relaxing and far quieter than you'd find in an ordinary petrol or diesel car. The steering is also impressively light, and it feels, well, quite akin to any other Citroën that you drive in the past 5 or 6 years. So that's not really a stretch for the brand. Oh, that was really unpleasant. So it's not much of a stretch for the brand, and certainly this light steering fits into the whole idea of the car in general. One issue, however, is the rearward visibility. Now, what Citroën has done is given the glass back almost a mini spoiler right in the middle of the glass. That means when you're looking back, your view is quite obstructed. And likewise, when you're going over the shoulder, so you're checking when you're getting onto a motorway, there's a huge pillar there, and that's becoming of that raked roofline. And that really is blocking your ability to see out properly. It's not a major gripe,
but certainly if you are driving it, it's not a major gripe, but it certainly is one that shows that this car has a slightly stronger emphasis on style than it does in function. But realistically, that's the only area of the car that follows that trait. Everywhere else has been brought with function in mind. But yeah, we'd have a look at that if you are going to sit it in it yourself. Again, an EV boils down to what type of driving you're doing. So if you're doing shorter trips to town or to school or to the supermarket each week, then an EV still makes real sense. And know that the initial cost is slightly higher than you would get with an equivalent petrol or diesel car, the running costs are so much lower that it's probably not going to take very long for you to see a real impact of that decision. Likewise, for long distance drivers who spend their time sitting on the motorway doing several hundred miles each week, then an EV is still going to be quite a jump. Yes, the infrastructure is improving, and yes, the charge times are getting better, but if you do need to do long distance trips, day in, day out, then it's likely that a petrol or diesel is still going to be the right choice. It boils down to getting the right car for the situation that you're in. That said, given that this car can charge up to 100 kilowatts, that means that a 0 to 80% charge will take just over half an hour, then you're not going to find yourself spending an awfully long amount of time at the plug. But it's finding those chargers in the first place. If you've got one near to you, then fantastic. But likewise, if you're going to be here, there and everywhere without a real sense of whether there are going to be chargers or not, then you might find an EV slightly more restrictive than it needs to be.
One of the greatest benefits of the new EC4 is simply how normal it feels. Citroën has been very clever with this car in making it not feel too dissimilar to a conventional petrol or diesel car, albeit of course with a great electric powertrain underneath it. Realistically, this is a great option for family drivers who want to make the switch to an electric car, and also those who want an EV which doesn't feel like an EV. That generous 200 mile plus range means that it's got more than enough in the tank for people who are going to be using it for shorter trips during the week, but likewise it's going to be perfectly adept at doing those longer journeys too. In short, the reason why this EC4 is such a good electric car is because it doesn't really feel like an electric car, and that's one of the main reasons why we'd highly recommend it. Thanks for watching this latest Motors.co.uk new car review. If you would like to see other reviews like this one on some of the EC4's key competitors, then follow the links coming up next.